High above the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, a single helicopter cuts through the smoke-filled sky, its rotors beating a desperate rhythm against time itself. Inside the cockpit, Captain Sarah Mitchell grips the controls with white knuckles, her green eyes fixed on the burning valley below where 3 American soldiers fight for their lives against impossible odds. This is not a sanctioned mission. This is not following orders. This is a choice that will destroy everything she has worked for, everything she has built, everything she believes about duty and honor. But sometimes, the greatest acts of courage require the greatest sacrifices. In the next 45 minutes, you will witness a story that challenges everything we think we know about heroism, loyalty, and the true cost of doing what is right. You will see how one woman's refusal to abandon her fellow soldiers leads to a confrontation with military authority that will change lives forever. Sarah Mitchell faces an impossible choice: follow orders and live with the knowledge that she left her comrades to die or risk everything to bring them home. Her decision will test the very foundations of military discipline and reveal the difference between following rules and following conscience. This is a story about the bonds that unite those who serve, the price of integrity, and the courage required to stand alone when everyone else has given up hope. It is about the moment when a soldier must choose between career and conscience, between safety and sacrifice, between the easy path and the right path. Welcome to a tale that will remind you why some things are worth any price, and why the greatest heroes are often those who pay the highest cost for their choices. I'd love to know where you're joining me from today. Please share your location in the comments below. And here's a question to consider as we begin this incredible journey. What would you be willing to sacrifice to save the life of someone you've never met but sworn to protect? Let's discover together what happens when duty calls and honor demands an answer that could cost everything. The desert sun painted Kandahar airfield in shades of amber and gold as Captain Sarah Mitchell completed her pre-flight inspection of the Black Hawk helicopter. March 15th, 2023, marked another day in what felt like an endless battle to prove herself worthy of the wings on her chest. The morning air carried the familiar scent of aviation fuel and dust, a combination that had become as natural to her as breathing during her 18 months deployed in Afghanistan. Sarah ran her gloved hand along the aircraft's fuselage, checking for any signs of damage or wear. At 29, she possessed the technical expertise and flight hours that should have earned her respect among her peers, yet every morning brought fresh reminders that acceptance remained elusive. Her compact 5'6" frame moved with practiced efficiency around the helicopter, her movements precise and methodical despite the weight of her flight gear. The sound of approaching voices made her pause. Captain Mike Jackson's distinctive laugh echoed across the flight line, followed by the deeper tones of Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and the other members of Bravo team. Sarah continued her inspection, but her attention shifted to their conversation as they drew nearer. "I'm just saying," Jackson's voice carried clearly in the morning air, "when the real action starts, you want someone who can handle the physical demands. This isn't about being politically correct. It's about bringing everyone home alive." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she forced herself to focus on checking the tail rotor assembly. She had learned long ago that responding to such comments only provided ammunition for those who questioned her presence in the unit. "Phoenix has more flight hours than half the pilots in this squadron," came the measured voice of Major Lisa Santos, Sarah's mentor, and one of the few women who had successfully navigated the male-dominated world of military aviation. Her record speaks for itself. Jackson's response was cut short by the arrival of Colonel Richard Brennan, whose commanding presence immediately shifted the dynamic of the group. The colonel's weathered face bore the scars of 2 decades in special operations, and his steel-gray eyes missed nothing as they surveyed the assembled personnel. "Briefing room, 10 minutes, Brennan announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "We have a situation that requires our immediate attention." As the group dispersed toward the operations building, Major Santos approached Sarah. The older woman's dark eyes held a mixture of concern and determination that Sarah had come to recognize over their months of working together. "Today's different, Sarah," Santos said quietly, ensuring their conversation remained private. "The mission they're about to brief, it's the kind that makes or breaks careers. Jackson's been lobbying for the primary rescue assignment, and Brennan's been listening." Sarah nodded, understanding the implications. Primary rescue assignments were the coveted positions that demonstrated a pilot's value to the unit and opened doors for future advancement. Being relegated to backup or transport duties sent a clear message about where she stood in the hierarchy. "I'm ready for whatever they throw at me," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the frustration building inside her chest. "I've been ready since the day I arrived here." The briefing room buzzed with quiet conversations as the team assembled around the large table, dominated by maps and satellite imagery. Sarah took her usual seat near the back, noting how Jackson positioned himself prominently near the front, where Colonel Brennan would have a clear view of his engagement and enthusiasm. The room fell silent as Brennan entered, followed by an intelligence officer carrying a classified folder marked with red tape. The colonel's expression was grim as he surveyed the assembled personnel, his gaze lingering momentarily on each face before settling on the maps spread across the table. "Gentlemen," Brennan began, then caught himself with a slight nod towards Sarah and Major Santos. "And ladies, we have a situation developing in Sector 7 that requires immediate attention. 12 hours ago, one of our reconnaissance drones went down in hostile territory approximately 50 miles northeast of our position." The colonel activated the overhead projector, displaying satellite images of rugged terrain, marked with red zones indicating enemy activity. Sarah studied the topography, automatically calculating approach vectors and potential landing zones, while Brennan continued his briefing. "The drone contains classified technology that cannot fall into enemy hands. Intelligence suggests hostile forces are already moving toward the crash site. We have a narrow window to extract the sensitive components before they're compromised." Jackson leaned forward in his chair, his body language clearly indicating his eagerness to volunteer for the mission. Sarah remained still, knowing that any display of enthusiasm from her would likely be interpreted as overconfidence or inappropriate aggression. "This will be a joint operation," Brennan continued. "Bravo team will handle ground operations, while our aviation assets provide insertion, extraction, and close air support as needed. The terrain is challenging, and intelligence indicates significant enemy presence in the area." The colonel's eyes swept the room before settling on Jackson. "Captain Jackson, you'll serve as primary rescue pilot for this operation. Your experience in similar terrain makes you the logical choice for this mission." Sarah felt the familiar sting of disappointment, but she maintained her professional composure. Beside her, Major Santos shifted slightly in her chair, a subtle sign of her own frustration with the assignment decision. "Captain Mitchell," Brennan continued, "you'll serve as backup pilot and handle any secondary transport requirements that may arise during the operation." The briefing continued with detailed discussions of timing, communication protocols, and contingency plans. Sarah absorbed every detail, knowing that even in a backup role she needed to be prepared for any eventuality. As the meeting concluded and personnel began filing out to prepare for the mission, she remained seated, studying the maps and satellite imagery with intense concentration. The morning sun climbed higher as Sarah watched Jackson's helicopter disappear into the distance, carrying Bravo team toward their objective. From her position in the backup aircraft, she monitored radio communications and tracked their progress on her navigation display. Everything seemed routine as the team approached the crash site, but something in the quality of the radio transmissions made her uneasy. The first sign of trouble came as a burst of static interrupted the normal communication pattern, followed by urgent voices reporting contact with enemy forces. The operations center at Kandahar Airfield hummed with controlled tension as Colonel Brennan spread detailed maps across the briefing table. The morning light streaming through the reinforced windows illuminated the faces of the assembled team, each member understanding that Operation Desert Phoenix would test their skills and resolve in ways that routine missions never could. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez stood at attention alongside his teammates, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he studied the satellite imagery displayed on the overhead screen. At 34, Rodriguez had survived 3 combat deployments, and his instincts told him this mission carried more risk than the colonel's measured briefing suggested. The crash site lay deep in territory controlled by hostile forces, surrounded by terrain that offered countless opportunities for ambush. Beside him, Sergeant First Class David Thompson adjusted his communication equipment, running through mental checklists of frequencies and backup protocols. Thompson's pale blue eyes reflected the analytical mind that had made him invaluable as the team's communications specialist. At 26, he possessed an almost supernatural ability to maintain contact even under the most challenging conditions, a skill that had saved lives on more than one occasion. Private First Class James Carter shifted nervously, his youthful face betraying the mixture of excitement and apprehension that marked every soldier's first major combat operation. At 22, Carter represented the future of the unit, eager to prove himself worthy of the trust placed in him by his more experienced teammates. His medical training made him essential to the mission, but his lack of combat experience remained a concern for everyone involved. Colonel Brennan's gravelly voice cut through the ambient noise as he began the detailed mission briefing. The drone went down at approximately 0300 hours local time. Our window for recovery is closing rapidly as enemy forces converge on the crash site. Intelligence indicates at least 2 hostile squads moving toward the objective, with the possibility of additional reinforcements arriving within 6 hours. Sarah listened intently from her position near the back of the room, her mind automatically processing the tactical implications of each piece of information. The terrain surrounding the crash site consisted of rocky valleys and steep ridges that would challenge even the most experienced pilot. Enemy forces held the high ground, providing them with significant tactical advantages that would complicate any rescue operation. Captain Jackson leaned forward, his confident demeanor radiating the kind of self-assurance that had earned him recognition throughout the squadron. "Sir, my bird can handle the insertion and extraction without difficulty. The terrain looks challenging, but nothing we haven't dealt with before." Brennan nodded approvingly at Jackson's assessment. "Your confidence is noted, Captain. However, I want everyone to understand that this operation carries significant risk. The enemy has had time to prepare defensive positions, and our intelligence on their exact numbers remains incomplete." The colonel activated a laser pointer, highlighting specific locations on the satellite imagery. "Bravo team will fast rope into this landing zone approximately 1 kilometer from the crash site. The approach will be conducted at low altitude to avoid enemy radar detection, but this increases vulnerability to small arms fire and portable surface-to-air missiles." Rodriguez studied the proposed landing zone, noting the limited cover and multiple potential firing positions that enemy forces could occupy. "Sir, what's our extraction timeline if things go sideways?" "Primary extraction is scheduled for 1400 hours, Brennan replied. "However, if the situation deteriorates, we have contingency plans for emergency extraction at any time. Captain Jackson will maintain overwatch position while you complete the ground operation." Thompson raised his hand slightly. "Communication protocols, sir. The terrain will interfere with standard radio frequencies." "Excellent question, Sergeant. You'll have access to satellite communication backup, and we'll maintain constant monitoring from this location. Any break in communication for more than 15 minutes triggers automatic emergency response." Carter listened carefully to every detail, understanding that his medical training might prove crucial if team members sustained injuries during the operation. The young soldier had trained extensively for combat situations, but the reality of facing enemy fire for the first time created a knot of anxiety in his stomach that he struggled to suppress. Sarah found herself analyzing every aspect of the mission profile, identifying potential complications that might require backup pilot intervention. The narrow valleys and unpredictable wind patterns in the target area could create challenging flying conditions, especially if weather deteriorated during the operation. Her experience in similar terrain told her that Jackson's confidence, while admirable, might be premature given the variables involved. Major Santos caught Sarah's attention with a subtle gesture, indicating her own concerns about the mission parameters. The veteran pilot had participated in dozens of similar operations, and her expression suggested she shared Sarah's reservations about the optimistic timeline and risk assessment. As the briefing concluded, team members dispersed to complete their individual preparations. Rodriguez gathered his weapons and ammunition, conducting the methodical equipment checks that had become second nature over his years of service. Thompson tested his communication gear, establishing baseline connections with the operations center and verifying backup frequencies. Carter reviewed his medical supplies, ensuring he carried everything necessary to treat potential casualties in the field. Jackson strutted toward his helicopter, with the swagger of someone who had never experienced a mission failure, his confidence infectious among the ground crew preparing his aircraft. Sarah watched him conduct his pre-flight inspection, noting his thorough but hurried approach to the safety checks that could mean the difference between success and disaster. The morning air filled with the distinctive whine of helicopter engines as both aircraft prepared for departure. Sarah completed her own pre-flight procedures with meticulous attention to detail, knowing that backup pilots often faced the most challenging situations when primary aircraft encountered difficulties. Radio communications crackled to life as Jackson's helicopter lifted off, carrying Bravo team toward their objective. Sarah monitored their progress from her position on the flight line, tracking their movement on radar displays and maintaining constant readiness for emergency deployment. The flight to the target area proceeded smoothly, with Jackson's confident voice providing regular updates on their progress. Rodriguez, Thompson, and Carter prepared for fast rope insertion, checking their equipment one final time as the helicopter approached the designated landing zone. Then everything changed in an instant. The first indication of trouble came as a burst of static interrupted Jackson's routine position report, followed immediately by the unmistakable sound of automatic weapons fire echoing through the radio speakers. Sarah's blood turned cold as she heard Jackson's voice, no longer confident but urgent and strained, reporting contact with enemy forces at the landing zone. The ambush had begun. The radio crackled with the chaos of combat as Sarah pressed her headset closer to her ears, straining to understand the fragmented transmissions coming from the crash site. Jackson's voice, stripped of its usual confidence, cut through the static with urgent reports that sent chills down her spine. Taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Landing zone is compromised. Repeat, landing zone is compromised. In the operations center, Colonel Brennan leaned over the communication console, his weathered face etched with concern as he monitored the deteriorating situation. The satellite feed showed Jackson's helicopter hovering precariously above the rocky terrain, while muzzle flashes erupted from concealed positions throughout the valley. Rodriguez's voice joined the chaotic symphony of radio traffic, his words punctuated by the distinctive crack of rifle fire. "We're pinned down. Enemy forces have the high ground on 3 sides. Request immediate close air support." Sarah watched the tactical display with growing alarm as red icons representing hostile forces multiplied around the crash site. Intelligence estimates had severely underestimated enemy strength in the area, and Bravo team found themselves facing a coordinated ambush that threatened to overwhelm their position. Thompson's communication equipment sparked to life as he attempted to coordinate with the operations center, while bullets whined overhead. "Base, this is Ghost. We count at least 20 hostiles in prepared positions. They were waiting for us." The young soldier's training took over as Carter pressed himself against a boulder, his medical bag clutched tightly against his chest while explosions erupted around their position. The reality of combat proved far more intense than any simulation, with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the deafening noise of battle overwhelming his senses. Jackson's helicopter struggled to maintain position as enemy fire intensified, forcing him to execute evasive maneuvers that made accurate fire support nearly impossible. "I can't get close enough for extraction. They've got us zeroed in." The situation deteriorated rapidly as an enemy rocket-propelled grenade streaked across the valley, its distinctive trail of smoke marking a deadly trajectory toward Jackson's aircraft. The pilot's reflexes saved his helicopter from a direct hit, but the explosion close to his tail rotor sent vibrations through the entire airframe. "Taking damage," Jackson reported, his voice tight with concentration as he fought to maintain control. "Hydraulics are compromised. I need to set down for emergency repairs." Rodriguez pressed his back against the rocky outcropping that provided their only cover, assessing their increasingly desperate situation. Enemy forces had clearly planned this ambush, positioning themselves to control all possible escape routes while maintaining devastating fields of fire across the valley floor. "Bull to base!" Rodriguez shouted into his radio microphone, using his call sign as bullets chipped fragments from the stone above his head. "We need immediate extraction. Jackson's bird is damaged, and we're surrounded." The explosion that changed everything came without warning. An enemy mortar round, perfectly aimed and timed, struck the fuel depot that Jackson had established near the crash site. The resulting fireball erupted skyward in a pillar of orange and black smoke, spreading burning aviation fuel across the valley floor like liquid death. Carter screamed as shrapnel from the explosion tore through his abdomen, the young soldier's first taste of combat, proving far more brutal than he had ever imagined. Blood seeped through his fingers as he pressed his hands against the wound, his medical training warring with shock and pain. Thompson dove for cover as burning fuel splashed across the rocks near his position, the intense heat singeing his uniform and filling his lungs with toxic smoke. His communication equipment sparked and died as flames licked at the sensitive electronics, cutting their primary link to the outside world. Rodriguez felt the concussion wave from the explosion slam into his chest like a physical blow, followed immediately by the sting of metal fragments piercing his left leg. The veteran sergeant gritted his teeth against the pain, knowing that their survival now depended on maintaining discipline under impossible circumstances. Jackson's helicopter, already struggling with damaged systems, found itself caught in the thermal updraft from the massive fire. The intense heat and swirling smoke made controlled flight nearly impossible as the pilot fought to keep his aircraft airborne while searching for a safe landing zone. "Mayday! Mayday!" Jackson's voice carried the edge of panic as his helicopter's engines began to falter. "I'm going down! Repeat, I'm going down!" The crash landing sent Jackson's helicopter sliding across the rocky terrain in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. The pilot survived the impact, but his aircraft lay broken and burning, adding to the inferno that now consumed the entire valley. Sarah listened in horror from her position at Kandahar airfield as the radio transmissions painted a picture of complete disaster. 3 soldiers trapped in a burning valley, surrounded by enemy forces, with their primary rescue helicopter destroyed and no immediate hope of extraction. Colonel Brennan's face reflected the weight of command as he processed the catastrophic turn of events. Every tactical option seemed to lead to the same conclusion. Bravo team was beyond help, trapped in a killing zone with no viable escape route. "All units, this is base." Brennan's voice carried the authority of decades in command, but Sarah detected the underlying strain of a leader facing an impossible decision. "Operation Desert Phoenix is compromised. All aircraft are ordered to maintain safe distance from the target area." Rodriguez pressed his radio transmitter with bloodied fingers, his voice hoarse from smoke inhalation, as he made what might be his final transmission. "Base, this is Bull. We're trapped in the fire. Jackson's down. Carter's hit bad. We need immediate extraction or we're not making it out." The silence that followed Rodriguez's transmission seemed to stretch forever, broken only by the crackling of flames and the distant sound of enemy gunfire. Sarah stared at the radio console, her mind racing through possible solutions, while her heart broke at the thought of abandoning fellow soldiers to certain death. Thompson's backup radio crackled to life with a weak signal, his voice barely audible through the static and interference. "Anyone out there? We're running out of time. The fire's spreading and we can't move, Carter." Colonel Brennan closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of command heavier than ever as he faced the reality that sometimes, despite all planning and preparation, soldiers died in situations beyond anyone's control. The enemy had prepared too well, the ambush too perfect, the fire too intense for any rescue attempt to succeed. Sarah felt something break inside her chest as she realized that 3 brave soldiers were about to die, while she sat safely on the ground, prevented by orders and protocol from attempting what everyone believed was an impossible rescue. The flames continued to spread across the valley floor, creating an impenetrable barrier between the trapped soldiers and any hope of salvation. The operations center fell into stunned silence as the full magnitude of the disaster became clear. Colonel Brennan stood motionless before the tactical display, his weathered hands gripping the edge of the console as he processed the catastrophic failure of Operation Desert Phoenix. Red icons representing enemy forces surrounded the crash site, while orange markers indicated the spreading fire that had transformed the valley into a death trap. Sarah rose from her chair with deliberate slowness, her green eyes fixed on the satellite imagery that showed 3 American soldiers trapped beyond the wall of flames. Every fiber of her being screamed against the paralysis that had seized the command structure, the acceptance of defeat that seemed to permeate the room like a toxic cloud. "Sir?" Sarah's voice cut through the oppressive quiet, steady despite the turmoil raging inside her chest. "Request permission to attempt rescue of Bravo team." Brennan turned toward her with the expression of a man who had already witnessed too much death in his career. His steel-gray eyes reflected the weight of command decisions that haunted every senior officer, the terrible mathematics of warfare that sometimes demanded sacrificing the few to preserve the many. "Captain Mitchell, the situation is beyond salvage. Jackson's helicopter is destroyed. Enemy forces control the high ground, and the fire has made the valley floor impassable. Any rescue attempt would be suicide. Major Santos stepped forward, her dark eyes blazing with the same determination that had carried her through 15 years of military aviation. "Colonel, Phoenix has the skills and experience necessary for this type of operation. Her helicopter is fully operational, and she knows that terrain better than anyone." "The answer is negative," Brennan replied firmly, his voice carrying the finality of absolute authority. "I will not authorize another aircraft to enter that killing zone. We've already lost one helicopter and crew. I won't compound that loss with additional casualties." Sarah felt her hands clench into fists as she struggled to maintain military bearing while her fellow soldiers died 50 miles away. The radio continued to broadcast their desperate transmissions, each word a reminder that time was running out for Rodriguez, Thompson, and Carter. Thompson's voice crackled through the speakers, weakened by smoke inhalation, but still coherent. "Base, this is Ghost. Carter's losing a lot of blood. We need medical evacuation immediately, or we're going to lose him." The young soldier's condition added urgency to an already desperate situation. Sarah's medical training told her that abdominal wounds like Carter's required immediate surgical intervention, something impossible to provide in their current circumstances. Every minute of delay reduced his chances of survival. Rodriguez's transmission followed, his veteran's calm barely masking the pain from his shrapnel wounds. "Bull to base. Fire's getting closer to our position. We've got maybe 30 minutes before we're completely surrounded by flames." Colonel Brennan closed his eyes briefly, the weight of command heavier than ever, as he faced the reality of losing 3 soldiers under his command. Sarah watched his internal struggle, understanding the impossible position that leadership placed him in, while knowing that she could not accept the same constraints. "Sir," Sarah tried again, her voice carrying the quiet intensity of absolute conviction, "I can reach them. My helicopter has the power and maneuverability to navigate that terrain. I can extract them one at a time if necessary." "Captain Mitchell, you are ordered to stand down," Brennan replied, his tone brooking no argument. "The risk assessment is clear. The probability of mission success is effectively 0, while the certainty of losing additional personnel approaches 100%. Major Santos placed a supportive hand on Sarah's shoulder, a touch conveying understanding and shared frustration. The veteran pilot had faced similar situations throughout her career, moments when military protocol conflicted with the fundamental duty to protect fellow soldiers. "Sarah, I know what you're thinking," Santos said quietly, "but sometimes the hardest part of being a soldier is accepting that we can't save everyone." Sarah shook her head, her mind already calculating flight paths and approach vectors that might allow her to reach the trapped soldiers. The fire created thermal updrafts that would make flying dangerous, but not impossible for a pilot with sufficient skill and determination. "With respect, Major, I didn't join the military to abandon fellow soldiers when they need help most. Rodriguez, Thompson, and Carter are counting on us to bring them home." The radio crackled again with Carter's weak voice, the young soldier's condition clearly deteriorating as blood loss and shock took their toll. "Is anyone coming for us? Please, I don't want to die here." Sarah felt something snap inside her chest at the sound of Carter's plea. The 22-year-old soldier represented everything she had sworn to protect when she took her oath of service. His youth and inexperience made his situation even more heartbreaking, a reminder that war consumed the innocent along with the experienced. Colonel Brennan turned away from the radio console, unable to listen to the desperate transmissions while knowing he could do nothing to help. His decision to abort the rescue operation was tactically sound, but emotionally devastating, the kind of choice that would haunt him for the rest of his career. "All personnel are ordered to maintain current positions," Brennan announced to the room. "No aircraft will be authorized to enter the target area under any circumstances." "That is a direct order." Sarah stared at the tactical display for a long moment, her mind racing through the implications of what she was about to do. Disobeying a direct order in a combat zone constituted a court-martial offense that could end her military career and result in imprisonment. But the alternative meant watching 3 soldiers die while she remained safely on the ground. The decision crystallized in her mind with absolute clarity. Military regulations and career consequences paled in comparison to the fundamental duty she owed to her fellow soldiers. Rodriguez, Thompson, and Carter had answered their nation's call to service, and she would not abandon them when they needed help most. Sarah turned and walked toward the exit with measured steps, her movement so casual that it initially attracted no attention from the other personnel in the operations center. Major Santos watched her with growing concern, recognizing the determination in her protégé's posture. "Sarah, where are you going?" Santos called after her. "To get my helicopter ready for a routine maintenance flight," Sarah replied, without turning around, her voice carrying just enough conviction to sound plausible. Colonel Brennan looked up sharply, his experienced eye recognizing the signs of a subordinate about to take matters into her own hands. "Captain Mitchell, you are specifically ordered to remain in this facility. Any attempt to launch an unauthorized mission will result in immediate arrest." Sarah paused at the doorway, her hand resting on the frame as she turned back to face her commanding officer. Her green eyes held no trace of insubordination, only the quiet resolve of someone who had found her line in the sand. "Sir, I understand the consequences of my actions, but I also understand that 3 American soldiers are going to die if someone doesn't help them. I can live with a court-martial. I can't live with abandoning my brothers." Before anyone could respond, Sarah disappeared through the doorway, her boots echoing in the corridor as she headed toward the flight line. Behind her, the operations center erupted in activity as personnel realized what was about to happen. Colonel Brennan grabbed his radio microphone, his voice carrying across the base communication network. "All security personnel, this is Base Commander. Captain Mitchell is not authorized for flight operations. Prevent her departure by any means necessary." But Sarah had already reached her helicopter, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she initiated the startup sequence. The turbine engines whined to life as she completed her abbreviated pre-flight checks, knowing that every second of delay reduced the chances of reaching the trapped soldiers in time. The radio in her cockpit crackled with urgent transmissions as base security scrambled to prevent her departure. Sarah ignored the voices demanding her compliance, focusing instead on the mechanical symphony of her helicopter as it prepared for flight. As the aircraft lifted off from Kandahar airfield, Sarah felt the weight of her decision settle around her shoulders like a heavy cloak. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, choosing conscience over career in a moment that would define the rest of her life. Behind her, the base grew smaller as she turned toward the mountains, carrying with her the hopes of 3 dying soldiers and the burden of a choice that would either make her a hero or destroy her completely. The Afghan landscape stretched endlessly beneath Sarah's helicopter as she flew toward the crash site, the familiar terrain transformed into hostile territory by the knowledge that enemy forces tracked her every movement. The morning sun climbed higher in the cloudless sky, creating thermal updrafts that buffeted her aircraft, while she maintained low altitude to avoid radar detection. Sarah's hands gripped the flight controls with steady precision, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Behind her lay the safety of Kandahar airfield and the certainty of court-martial proceedings that awaited her return. Ahead lay 50 miles of enemy-controlled territory and 3 soldiers whose lives depended on her ability to accomplish what everyone else deemed impossible. The radio crackled with urgent transmissions from the base as Colonel Brennan attempted to recall her unauthorized mission. Sarah reached over and switched off the command frequency, knowing that listening to orders she could not obey would only undermine her focus when she needed it most. Rodriguez's voice cut through the static on the emergency frequency, his words strained but coherent as he provided updates on their deteriorating situation. "Any station, this is Bull. Carter's condition is critical. He's lost consciousness and his pulse is getting weaker. We need medical evacuation immediately." Sarah keyed her microphone, her voice calm despite the gravity of their circumstances. "Bull, this is Phoenix. I'm inbound to your location. Estimate arrival in 20 minutes. How copy?" The silence that followed her transmission seemed to stretch forever before Rodriguez responded, his voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and desperate hope. "Phoenix, confirm you are inbound for extraction? We were told no rescue was possible." "That's affirmative, Bull. I'm coming to get you out of there. What's your current tactical situation?" Thompson's voice joined the conversation, his communication training evident in the precise way he delivered critical information. "Phoenix, this is Ghost. Enemy forces maintain overwatch positions on the ridgelines. Fire has spread across approximately 60% of the valley floor. Our position is becoming untenable." Sarah processed the tactical information while navigating through a narrow canyon that provided concealment from enemy observation posts. The terrain ahead grew increasingly challenging as rocky peaks rose on both sides of her flight path, creating wind shear that demanded constant attention to maintain stable flight. Ghost, I need you to mark your position with smoke when I'm 2 minutes out. Can you do that without compromising your concealment? Affirmative, Phoenix. We have 1 smoke grenade remaining. Be advised, enemy forces will see the signal too. Sarah understood the implications of Thompson's warning. The smoke that would guide her to their position would also alert enemy forces to her approach, giving them time to prepare concentrated fire against her helicopter. The element of surprise, already minimal, would be completely lost. The first indication of enemy awareness came as her radar warning receiver began chirping, indicating that hostile forces were attempting to lock onto her aircraft with surface-to-air missiles. Sarah immediately began evasive maneuvers, using the terrain to mask her approach while maintaining course toward the crash site. Phoenix, this is Ghost. We're seeing increased enemy activity on the ridgelines. They know you're coming. Sarah's jaw tightened as she processed the information. Enemy forces had clearly prepared for the possibility of rescue attempts, positioning themselves to create overlapping fields of fire that would make her approach extremely dangerous. The burning valley ahead represented a gauntlet that would test every skill she had developed over her years of military aviation. Rodriguez's voice carried new urgency as he reported on Carter's condition. Phoenix, the kid's in bad shape. His breathing is shallow and his skin is getting pale. I don't think he has much time left. The young soldier's deteriorating condition added pressure to an already desperate situation. Sarah knew that abdominal wounds like Carter's required immediate surgical intervention, something impossible to provide in their current circumstances. Every minute of delay reduced his chances of survival. Bull, I need you to prepare Carter for immediate evacuation. Use whatever medical supplies you have to stabilize him for transport. I'll be there soon. Sarah crested the final ridge before the crash site and immediately understood why everyone had deemed rescue impossible. The valley floor burned like the surface of hell itself, with pillars of black smoke rising hundreds of feet into the air. Enemy muzzle flashes sparkled from concealed positions throughout the surrounding hills, creating a deadly crossfire that covered every possible approach route. Thompson's smoke grenade popped with a distinctive sound, sending purple smoke drifting across the rocky outcropping where Bravo team had taken shelter. The signal provided Sarah with their exact location, but it also drew immediate enemy fire as hostile forces concentrated their attention on the marked position. "Taking fire! Taking fire!" Rodriguez shouted into his radio as bullets sparked off the rocks around their position. "Phoenix, they've got us zeroed in." Sarah dove her helicopter toward the valley floor, using speed and terrain masking to complicate enemy targeting solutions. Tracer rounds streaked past her cockpit windows as she maneuvered through the maze of smoke and flames, her instrument struggling to provide accurate readings in the superheated air. The thermal updrafts from the burning fuel created severe turbulence that threatened to tear control of the aircraft from her hands. Sarah fought the stick with both hands, her muscles straining against the aerodynamic forces that tried to flip her helicopter inverted or slam it into the rocky walls of the valley. "Phoenix, you're taking heavy fire from multiple positions," Thompson reported, his voice tight with concern for her safety. "The LZ is completely exposed." Sarah could see the truth of his assessment as she approached their position. The rocky outcropping that provided Bravo team with shelter offered no protection for a landing helicopter. She would have to set down in the open, fully exposed to enemy fire, while loading wounded soldiers who could not move quickly. "Ghost, I'm going to have to make multiple trips. The bird can't carry all 3 of you with the damage I'm taking, and the thermal conditions down here." The realization that she would have to land repeatedly in the killing zone added new dimensions to an already impossible mission. Each landing would give enemy forces additional opportunities to destroy her helicopter, while the spreading fire reduced the available landing areas with every passing minute. Rodriguez understood the implications immediately. "Phoenix, take Carter first. He needs medical attention that we can't provide here." Sarah appreciated the veteran sergeant's tactical thinking, but she also recognized the sacrifice he was making. By prioritizing Carter's evacuation, Rodriguez and Thompson were accepting that they might not survive long enough for her return trips. "Negative, Bull. I'm taking you all out together or not at all. We don't leave anyone behind." The enemy fire intensified as Sarah committed to her final approach. tracer rounds creating deadly light shows in the smoke-filled air around her helicopter. She could hear the distinctive sound of bullets striking her aircraft's armor plating, each impact a reminder that her margin for error had shrunk to nothing. "Phoenix, your bird is taking hits," Thompson called out, his trained eye spotting the damage that enemy fire was inflicting on her helicopter. Sarah felt the aircraft shudder as a burst of automatic weapons fire stitched across her tail boom, damaging flight control systems that she would need for the extraction. Warning lights illuminated her instrument panel as hydraulic pressure dropped and electrical systems began failing. The landing zone rushed toward her through the wall of smoke and flames, a small patch of rocky ground that represented the only hope of salvation for 3 dying American soldiers. Sarah gritted her teeth and committed to the landing, knowing that once she touched down in that inferno, there would be no turning back. The heat from the burning fuel washed over her helicopter like a physical force as she descended into hell itself. Sarah's helicopter touched down on the rocky ground with a jarring impact that sent vibrations through the entire airframe. The rotor wash immediately spread the surrounding flames in wild patterns, creating a hellish landscape of fire and smoke. Enemy gunfire erupted from multiple positions as hostile forces concentrated their fire on the exposed aircraft. Warning lights flashed across her instrument panel as bullets sparked off the armor plating. Sarah shut down her engines to prevent fuel explosion while keeping rotors turning at minimum power, ready for immediate takeoff once she loaded the first soldier. Rodriguez pressed himself against the boulder that had provided their shelter, his weathered face grim with the knowledge that their rescue had just become exponentially more dangerous. The veteran sergeant understood that Sarah's helicopter presented a stationary target that enemy forces would attempt to destroy. "Phoenix is on the ground," Rodriguez shouted into his radio, his voice barely audible over the roar of flames and helicopter rotors. "Moving to extract casualties now." Thompson crawled toward Carter's position, assessing the young soldier's condition. Carter lay unconscious against the rocks, his face pale from blood loss, while his breathing remained shallow and irregular. The private's condition had deteriorated beyond what field medicine could address. "Carter's critical," Thompson called out. "He needs immediate surgical intervention, or we're going to lose him." Sarah emerged from her helicopter with her sidearm drawn, her compact frame moving with surprising speed despite the weight of her flight gear. The intense heat made the air shimmer, while smoke reduced visibility to mere yards. Rodriguez struggled to his feet, favoring his left leg where shrapnel had torn through muscle. The veteran sergeant gritted his teeth against the pain, knowing his mobility would be crucial for reaching Sarah's helicopter through the gauntlet of enemy fire. "Bull, I'm coming to you," Sarah shouted over the battle noise. "Can you move on your own?" "Affirmative," Rodriguez replied, though his grimace betrayed the cost of movement. "Thompson and I can make it, but Carter needs to be carried." Sarah reached their position in a low crouch, her green eyes assessing the tactical situation. Enemy muzzle flashes continued sparkling from the ridgelines, while spreading fire created an ever-shrinking island of survivable ground. Carter's unconscious form presented the most immediate challenge. The young soldier's dead weight would challenge Sarah's smaller frame, but she knelt beside him, checking his pulse while bullets whined overhead. "His pulse is weak but steady," Sarah announced. "We need to move him now before he goes into shock." Rodriguez positioned himself on Carter's left side, while Sarah took the right, both preparing to lift the wounded private despite their injuries and intense enemy fire. Thompson provided covering fire, though smoke made accurate shooting nearly impossible. "On 3, Sarah counted steadily. 1, 2, 3. Sarah and Rodriguez lifted Carter between them, his weight distributed across their shoulders as they began the desperate journey toward the helicopter. The young soldier's blood seeped through his uniform, leaving a crimson trail on rocky ground. Enemy fire intensified as hostile forces recognized the evacuation attempt. Tracer rounds streaked through the air, while rifle bullets echoed off valley walls. Sarah felt the heat of a near miss as a bullet passed inches from her head. "Keep moving," Rodriguez shouted, his veteran instincts driving him forward despite shrapnel wounds. "Don't stop for anything." The distance to the helicopter seemed endless as they struggled across uneven terrain with Carter's unconscious weight. Sarah's muscles burned from exertion while sweat poured down her face, mixing with soot and grime coating everything in the burning valley. A burst of automatic weapons fire stitched across the ground directly in front of them, forcing them to halt while enemy bullets sparked off rocks. Sarah could feel Carter's pulse growing weaker as blood loss continued taking its toll. "We're almost there," Sarah called out encouragingly. "Just a few more yards." Rodriguez's wounded leg nearly buckled as they resumed movement, but the veteran sergeant's determination kept him upright through sheer will. His weathered face reflected pain and the weight of responsibility for his team's survival. The helicopter's open cargo door represented salvation as they approached through the wall of heat and smoke. Sarah could see damage that enemy fire had inflicted on her aircraft's exterior, with bullet holes and scorch marks covering the fuselage. "Get him in the back," Sarah ordered as they reached the aircraft. "Secure him for transport." Rodriguez and Thompson worked together, lifting Carter into the cargo compartment, their movements hampered by injuries and continuing enemy fire. Sarah climbed into the pilot's seat, hands moving across controls with practiced efficiency. The helicopter's engines whined to life, but warning lights immediately illuminated her panel. Damage from enemy fire had compromised multiple systems, making flight dangerous and extraction uncertain. "Everyone hold on," Sarah announced, pulling collective pitch and lifting the damaged helicopter off rocky ground. "We're getting out of here." The aircraft rose unsteadily into smoke-filled air, damaged systems protesting flight demands while enemy fire tracked their movement. Sarah fought controls with both hands, compensating for hydraulic failures. But as they climbed away, Sarah realized with growing horror that her helicopter's condition was worse than assessed. The damage had reduced lifting capacity to the point where carrying all 3 soldiers would be impossible. She would have to return to that burning hell twice more. Sarah's damaged helicopter limped through the smoke-filled sky as she fought to maintain altitude with failing hydraulic systems. The instrument panel resembled a Christmas tree of warning lights, each red indicator representing another system pushed beyond operational limits. Behind her, Rodriguez worked frantically to stabilize Carter's condition. "How's he doing back there?" Sarah called over the engine noise, her voice tight with concentration as she compensated for the aircraft's tendency to yaw left due to tail rotor damage. Rodriguez pressed his hands against Carter's abdominal wound, his weathered face grim as he assessed the young soldier's deteriorating condition. "Pulse is getting weaker and his breathing is shallow. We need to get him to a surgeon fast." The reality of their situation weighed heavily on Sarah's mind as she calculated fuel consumption and aircraft performance. Her helicopter could barely maintain flight with its current damage, and the additional weight of 3 soldiers would likely exceed its compromised lifting capacity. "Phoenix, this is Ghost." Thompson's voice carried strain. "I'm monitoring enemy radio traffic. They're repositioning forces to intercept our return flight path." Sarah processed the tactical information while nursing her crippled aircraft toward Kandahar airfield. Enemy forces had anticipated her rescue attempt and were now moving to prevent mission completion. The window for extracting Rodriguez and Thompson was closing rapidly. "Ghost, I need you to understand something," Sarah said, her voice carrying the weight of an impossible decision. "My bird took more damage than initially thought. I can't carry all 3 of you simultaneously without risking a crash that kills everyone." The silence that followed seemed endless as implications sank in. Rodriguez and Thompson exchanged glances, both veterans understanding that their rescue had become significantly more complicated. "Phoenix, are you saying you have to choose who gets extracted first?" Thompson asked precisely. "Negative, Ghost. I'm making multiple trips. Carter goes to medical first. Then I come back for both of you. But the enemy knows I'm coming now and they'll be ready." Rodriguez shifted position to better support Carter's unconscious form, his movement hampered by shrapnel wounds. The veteran sergeant's tactical mind was already processing challenges Sarah would face on her return trip. "Phoenix, the LZ will be completely compromised by the time you get back," Rodriguez observed. "They'll have every weapon in the sector trained on that spot." Sarah knew he was right, but the alternative was unacceptable. Military doctrine emphasized that no soldier should be left behind, and she had not come this far to abandon Rodriguez and Thompson. "Bull, I didn't steal a helicopter and disobey direct orders just to leave you guys behind. I'm coming back for you regardless of what's waiting." The radio crackled with transmissions from Kandahar airfield as Colonel Brennan attempted contact. She had switched off the command frequency during outbound flight, but emergency channels still carried urgent messages. "All stations, this is Base Commander," Brennan's voice carried across emergency frequency. "Captain Mitchell is ordered to return to base immediately. Do not attempt additional rescue operations." Sarah reduced radio volume, unwilling to listen to orders conflicting with her fundamental duty. Rodriguez and Thompson heard the transmission clearly, understanding that Sarah's career was already destroyed regardless of outcome. "Phoenix, you don't have to do this," Thompson said quietly. "You've already saved Carter's life. No one would blame you for following orders." "Ghost, with all due respect, that's not how this works," Sarah replied firmly. "We don't abandon our people. Carter, Rodriguez, and Thompson all go home, or none of us do." The helicopter shuddered as another hydraulic line failed, sending warning alarms through the cockpit, while Sarah fought to maintain control. The aircraft's condition continued deteriorating, making her planned return trip increasingly dangerous. Rodriguez watched landscape pass beneath them, his experienced eye noting enemy positions that would complicate Sarah's return flight. Hostile forces were already moving to establish new firing positions along likely approach routes. "Phoenix, when you come back for us, they're going to be ready with everything they've got," Rodriguez warned. "Surface-to-air missiles, heavy machine guns, maybe even mortars." Sarah understood the tactical reality, but her determination remained unshaken. The image of Rodriguez and Thompson trapped in that burning valley while she flew safely away was unacceptable. "Bull, I appreciate the warning, but my decision is final. I'm dropping Carter at medical, refueling if possible, and coming back for you and Ghost." The familiar sight of Kandahar airfield appeared through heat haze ahead, its runways representing temporary safety. Sarah could see medical personnel and security forces assembling on the flight line. "Medical, this is Phoenix inbound with one urgent surgical case," Sarah transmitted. "ETA 2 minutes. Have a trauma team standing by." Rodriguez continued applying pressure to Carter's wound while monitoring vital signs. The private's condition remained critical, but Rodriguez's field medicine had stabilized him enough for transport. The helicopter touched down on the medical pad as trauma teams rushed forward. Sarah kept engines running, preparing for immediate departure once Carter was transferred. "Get him out of here," Sarah shouted over engine noise. "He needs surgery now." Rodriguez and Thompson helped transfer Carter to the waiting medical team. The young soldier's unconscious form disappeared into the medical facility as doctors began fighting to save his life. Colonel Brennan appeared at Sarah's cockpit window, his weathered face reflecting anger and grudging admiration. The confrontation she had been dreading was about to begin, but Rodriguez and Thompson were still trapped in that burning valley, and Sarah's mission was far from over. Colonel Brennan's weathered face filled Sarah's cockpit window, his steel-grey eyes reflecting a mixture of fury and grudging respect. Behind him, military police officers positioned themselves around her helicopter, their weapons ready, but not yet raised. The confrontation Sarah had anticipated was about to unfold in the most public way possible. "Captain Mitchell, shut down your engines immediately," Brennan commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority of 3 decades in uniform. "You are under arrest for disobeying direct orders and unauthorized use of military equipment." Sarah kept her hands on the flight controls, her green eyes meeting Brennan's gaze with unwavering determination. The helicopter's turbines continued their high-pitched whine as she maintained power for immediate departure, knowing that every second of delay reduced Rodriguez and Thompson's chances of survival. "Sir, I have 2 soldiers still trapped in that valley," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the gravity of her situation. "I'm going back for them." "Like hell you are," Brennan shot back, his composure cracking as the weight of command decisions pressed down on him. "You've already violated enough regulations to earn a court-martial. I won't let you throw your life away on a suicide mission." Major Santos appeared beside Brennan, her dark eyes reflecting the internal conflict between military discipline and personal loyalty. The veteran pilot understood Sarah's motivations better than anyone, having faced similar impossible choices throughout her own career. "Sarah, please," Santos said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of friendship and professional concern. "You've done everything possible. Carter is alive because of your actions. Don't destroy yourself trying to save everyone." Sarah felt the pull of Santos's words, the temptation to accept that she had done enough and follow orders like a good soldier, but the image of Rodriguez and Thompson trapped in that burning hellscape refused to leave her mind, their faces haunting her with the knowledge that abandonment meant certain death. "Major, I took an oath to protect my fellow soldiers," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the quiet intensity of absolute conviction. "That oath doesn't come with exceptions for difficult circumstances or direct orders." Medical personnel rushed past the standoff as they wheeled Carter's unconscious form toward the surgical unit. The young soldier's pale face served as a stark reminder of what awaited Rodriguez and Thompson if Sarah failed to return for them. Brennan stepped closer to the cockpit, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that only Sarah could hear. "Captain, I'm ordering you to stand down. If you attempt to leave this base, I will authorize the use of force to stop you." The threat hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Sarah understood that Brennan was not bluffing. The colonel would order his security forces to disable her helicopter, rather than allow her to continue what he viewed as a suicide mission. "Sir, with all due respect, you can court-martial me, imprison me, or even shoot me," Sarah replied, her voice never wavering from its calm determination. "But I will not abandon Rodriguez and Thompson to die in that valley." Thompson's voice crackled through the emergency radio frequency, his transmission weak but audible to everyone gathered around the helicopter. "Phoenix, this is Ghost. Enemy forces are massing for final assault on our position. We need immediate extraction or we're not going to make it." The desperation in Thompson's voice cut through the military protocol and bureaucratic concerns like a knife. Sarah watched Brennan's face as the young soldier's plea for help reached everyone present, seeing the internal struggle between duty and compassion play out in the colonel's weathered features. Rodriguez's voice followed, his veteran's calm barely masking the pain from his worsening injuries. "Bull to Phoenix. Fire's reached our perimeter. We've got maybe 15 minutes before our position becomes untenable." Sarah keyed her microphone, her voice carrying across the base communication network for everyone to hear. "Ghost Bull, this is Phoenix. I'm coming back for you. Hold your position and be ready for immediate extraction." "Captain Mitchell, I'm ordering you to maintain radio silence," Brennan commanded, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. The colonel was beginning to understand that Sarah would not be deterred by threats or consequences. Major Santos placed a restraining hand on Brennan's arm, her eyes reflecting the wisdom of someone who had seen too many good soldiers die because of inflexible thinking. "Colonel, maybe we should consider supporting her mission instead of preventing it." "Absolutely not," Brennan replied firmly. "I will not authorize additional aircraft to enter that death trap. The tactical assessment is clear. Any rescue attempt will result in the loss of both helicopter and crew." Sarah felt her patience finally reach its breaking point. Rodriguez and Thompson were dying, while military bureaucracy debated their fate, and she could no longer tolerate the paralysis that had seized the command structure. "Sir, I'm not requesting authorization," Sarah announced, her voice carrying across the flight line with crystal clarity. "I'm informing you that I'm going back for my soldiers, with or without your permission." The helicopter's engine spooled up to full power as Sarah prepared for takeoff, her hands moving across the controls with practiced efficiency despite the chaos surrounding her aircraft. Warning lights continued flashing across her instrument panel, reminders of the damage that made flight dangerous but not impossible. Brennan stepped back from the aircraft, his hand moving toward his sidearm as he prepared to follow through on his threat to use force. The military police officers raised their weapons, creating a tense standoff that could end in tragedy for everyone involved. "Colonel, don't do this," Santos warned, her voice carrying the urgency of someone who recognized the potential for disaster. "She's one of our best pilots, and those soldiers need her help." Sarah felt the helicopter lift off the ground as she pulled collective pitch, rising into the afternoon sky, despite the weapons trained on her aircraft. The decision to fire on an American helicopter, attempting to rescue American soldiers, proved too difficult for the security forces to execute. Brennan watched helplessly as Sarah's damaged helicopter climbed away from Kandahar airfield, carrying with it his best pilot and the slim hope of saving Rodriguez and Thompson. The colonel's face reflected the terrible burden of command decisions that haunted every senior officer. "All units, this is Base Commander," Brennan transmitted on the emergency frequency, his voice heavy with resignation. "Captain Mitchell is proceeding with unauthorized rescue mission. All aircraft are ordered to provide support if requested." Sarah heard the transmission as she turned toward the mountains, understanding that Brennan had finally chosen compassion over protocol. The colonel's decision to support her mission might cost him his own career, but it gave Rodriguez and Thompson their only chance of survival. Behind her, Kandahar airfield grew smaller as she flew toward the burning valley, where 2 American soldiers waited for salvation that might never come. Sarah's battered helicopter carved through the Afghan sky as she retraced her flight path toward the burning valley, every mile bringing her closer to what military analysts had already classified as an impossible mission. The afternoon sun climbed higher, creating thermal updrafts that made her damaged aircraft buck and shudder like a wounded animal fighting for survival. The radio crackled with increasingly desperate transmissions from Rodriguez and Thompson as their tactical situation deteriorated beyond salvage. Enemy forces had used the time during Sarah's absence to establish overlapping fields of fire that would turn the landing zone into a killing field. "Phoenix, this is Bull." Rodriguez's voice carried the strain of prolonged combat and worsening injuries. "Enemy has repositioned heavy weapons on all approaches to our position. They're waiting for you." Sarah processed the tactical information while fighting to maintain control of her helicopter's damaged flight systems. The hydraulic pressure continued dropping, making every control input a struggle against mechanical failure that threatened to send her aircraft spinning into the rocky peaks below. "Bull, I copy your transmission. What's your ammunition status?" "We're down to our last magazines," Rodriguez replied grimly. "Ghost has maybe 30 rounds left, and I'm running on fumes. We can't hold this position much longer." Thompson's voice joined the conversation, his communication training evident in the precise way he delivered critical intelligence. "Phoenix, I'm monitoring enemy radio traffic. They're coordinating a final assault, timed to coincide with your arrival. They want to take us all out together." The enemy's tactical thinking was sound from their perspective. Allowing Sarah to land and attempt extraction would give them the opportunity to destroy both the rescue helicopter and eliminate the remaining American soldiers in a single coordinated attack. Sarah's radar warning receiver began chirping insistently as enemy forces attempted to lock onto her aircraft with surface-to-air missiles. She immediately began evasive maneuvers, using the mountainous terrain to mask her approach while maintaining course toward the crash site. "Phoenix, they've got SAMs tracking you," Thompson warned, his voice tight with concern for her safety. "Multiple launch signatures from the ridge lines." Sarah dove her helicopter into a narrow canyon, the rocky walls flashing past her cockpit windows as she sought protection from the missile threat. The confined space made flying treacherous, but it also prevented enemy forces from maintaining radar lock on her aircraft. The first surface-to-air missile streaked overhead, its exhaust trail visible through the smoke that continued pouring from the burning valley. Sarah felt the heat wash over her helicopter as the weapon passed close enough to trigger her defensive systems. "Missile in the air," Sarah called out, her voice steady despite the mortal danger. "Taking evasive action." Rodriguez and Thompson watched from their rocky shelter as the missile exploded harmlessly against the canyon wall, sending a shower of debris cascading into the valley below. The near miss served as a stark reminder of the gauntlet Sarah would have to run to reach their position. "Phoenix, the LZ is completely compromised," Rodriguez observed, his veteran's eye assessing the tactical situation with brutal honesty. "You can't land here without getting shot down." Sarah emerged from the canyon and immediately saw the truth of Rodriguez's assessment. Enemy muzzle flashes sparkled from concealed positions throughout the surrounding hills, creating interlocking fields of fire that covered every possible approach to the landing zone. The burning fuel had spread across most of the valley floor, leaving only a small patch of rocky ground where Rodriguez and Thompson maintained their desperate defense. Smoke reduced visibility to mere yards, while the intense heat created turbulence that would make precision flying nearly impossible. "Bull, I'm coming in whether they're ready or not," Sarah announced, her voice carrying the determination that had brought her this far. "Be prepared for immediate extraction when I touch down." Rodriguez struggled to his feet, his wounded leg barely supporting his weight as he prepared for the final sprint to Sarah's helicopter. The veteran sergeant's face reflected the grim knowledge that their survival depended on perfect timing and extraordinary luck. Thompson checked his remaining ammunition one final time, knowing that he would have to provide covering fire during the most dangerous phase of the extraction. The communication specialist's pale blue eyes swept the ridgelines, searching for threats while preparing for the firefight of his life. "Phoenix, we're ready," Thompson reported, his voice carrying the calm professionalism that had made him invaluable to Bravo team. "Ghost and Bull are prepared for immediate movement to your aircraft." Sarah committed to her final approach, diving toward the landing zone through a storm of enemy fire that turned the air around her helicopter into a deadly light show. Tracer rounds streaked past her cockpit, while the distinctive crack of rifle bullets echoed off the valley walls. The helicopter shuddered as enemy fire found its mark, further damaging systems that were already operating beyond their design limits. Warning alarms filled the cockpit as electrical systems failed and hydraulic fluid sprayed across her windscreen. "Taking heavy fire," Sarah called out, her voice strained as she fought to maintain control of her disintegrating aircraft. "I'm hit but still flying." Rodriguez and Thompson began their desperate dash toward the landing zone, their movements hampered by injuries and the intense enemy fire that tracked their progress across the rocky ground. Bullets sparked off the stones around them as they struggled through the maze of smoke and flames. A rocket-propelled grenade streaked across the valley, its warhead exploding close enough to Sarah's helicopter to shower the aircraft with shrapnel. The blast wave threw her aircraft sideways, nearly sending it crashing into the rocky walls that surrounded the landing zone. "RPG! RPG!" Thompson shouted into his radio as he dove for cover behind a boulder. "They're trying to bring you down before you can land." Sarah fought the controls with both hands, her muscles straining against the aerodynamic forces that threatened to tear her helicopter apart. The aircraft's condition had deteriorated to the point where every second of flight represented a victory against mechanical failure. The landing zone rushed toward her through the wall of smoke and flames, a small patch of rocky ground that represented the only hope of salvation for Rodriguez and Thompson. Sarah gritted her teeth and committed to the landing, knowing that once she touched down in that inferno, there would be no second chances. Enemy fire intensified as hostile forces recognized that this would be their final opportunity to prevent the rescue. Machine gun positions opened up from multiple directions, while mortar rounds began falling around the landing zone with increasing accuracy. Sarah's helicopter touched down hard on the rocky ground, its damaged landing gear protesting the impact as she fought to keep the aircraft upright. The rotor wash spread the surrounding flames in wild patterns, while enemy bullets continued to strike her aircraft's armor plating. "I'm on the ground," Sarah announced, her voice barely audible over the chaos of battle. "Move! Move! Move!" Rodriguez and Thompson sprinted toward the helicopter, through the storm of enemy fire, their survival depending on reaching Sarah's aircraft before hostile forces could destroy it. The distance seemed endless as they struggled across the uneven terrain, with bullets whining around them. But as they approached the helicopter, Sarah realized with growing horror that her aircraft's condition was even worse than she had feared. The damage from enemy fire had compromised critical systems, and she was no longer certain the helicopter could lift off with additional weight. The terrible mathematics of survival meant that her rescue mission might have become a suicide pact for all three of them. Rodriguez reached Sarah's helicopter first, his wounded leg nearly buckling as he dove into the cargo compartment, while bullets sparked off the aircraft's armor plating. The veteran sergeant's weathered face reflected the pain of his injuries and the desperate urgency of their situation as enemy fire intensified around the landing zone. Thompson followed seconds later, his communication equipment damaged by shrapnel as he threw himself into the helicopter's cramped interior. The young specialist's pale blue eyes swept the surrounding ridgelines, counting muzzle flashes and calculating the overwhelming odds they faced. We're in," Rodriguez shouted over the roar of engines and gunfire, his voice barely audible above the chaos that surrounded them. "Get us out of here." Sarah pulled collective pitch, demanding maximum performance from her critically damaged helicopter, as warning lights flashed across her instrument panel like angry stars. The aircraft shuddered and groaned under the strain, its compromised systems protesting every demand she placed upon them. But instead of rising into the smoke-filled sky, the helicopter remained stubbornly anchored to the rocky ground. The additional weight of Rodriguez and Thompson, combined with the extensive battle damage, had pushed her aircraft beyond its operational limits. Come on," Sarah muttered through gritted teeth, her hands working the controls with desperate precision as she fought to coax lift from her dying machine. "Don't quit on me now." Enemy fire concentrated on the stationary helicopter as hostile forces recognized their opportunity to destroy the rescue mission. Rocket-propelled grenades streaked across the valley, while machine gun bullets stitched patterns across the aircraft's fuselage. "Phoenix, we're not moving," Thompson called out, his training allowing him to assess their tactical situation with brutal clarity. "The bird's too damaged to carry all of us." Rodriguez understood the implications immediately, his veteran's mind processing the terrible mathematics of survival that had trapped them in the killing zone. The helicopter could not lift off with their combined weight, but staying on the ground meant certain death for everyone. "Sarah, you need to leave us and save yourself," Rodriguez said quietly, his voice carrying the calm acceptance of a soldier who had faced death many times before. "There's no point in all three of us dying here." "Negative," Sarah replied firmly, her voice cutting through the noise of battle with absolute conviction. "I didn't come this far to leave anyone behind. We're all going home together." Sarah's hands moved across her instrument panel with practiced efficiency, shutting down non-essential systems to reduce weight while redirecting power to the main rotor. Every ounce of lift would be crucial if she hoped to get her overloaded aircraft off the ground. A mortar round exploded close enough to shower the helicopter with debris, the blast wave rocking the aircraft on its damaged landing gear. Sarah felt the concussion through her seat as shrapnel peppered the cockpit windows, creating spiderweb patterns in the armored glass. "Incoming mortars," Thompson warned, his communication training evident in the precise way he delivered tactical information under extreme stress. "They're walking them in on our position." Sarah made a desperate decision that violated every principle of safe aviation. She engaged the helicopter's emergency power setting, pushing the engines beyond their design limits in a final gamble to achieve the lift necessary for takeoff. The turbines screamed in protest as they exceeded maximum operating temperature, warning alarms filling the cockpit with urgent alerts about impending engine failure. Sarah ignored the warnings, knowing that mechanical failure was preferable to the certain death that awaited them on the ground. Rodriguez felt the helicopter shudder as Sarah demanded impossible performance from her damaged aircraft. The veteran sergeant understood that she was risking catastrophic engine failure in her attempt to save their lives, a calculated gamble that could kill them all if the turbines exploded. "Phoenix, your engines are redlining," Thompson called out, his eyes fixed on the instrument readings visible from the cargo compartment. "You're going to blow them up." "Better than staying here to get shot to pieces," Sarah replied grimly, her voice steady despite the mortal danger they faced. "Hold on, this is going to be rough." The helicopter lurched upward with agonizing slowness, its damaged rotor system struggling to generate sufficient lift in the superheated air above the burning valley. Sarah felt every bullet impact as enemy fire tracked their movement, each hit threatening to send them crashing back to the rocky ground. A surface-to-air missile streaked toward their aircraft, its heat-seeking warhead locked onto the helicopter's exhaust signature. Sarah had no defensive countermeasures remaining, leaving her with only evasive maneuvers to avoid the incoming weapon. "Sam inbound!" Rodriguez shouted, his experienced eye tracking the missile's approach as it closed the distance to their helicopter with deadly precision. "Brake left! Brake left!" Sarah threw her aircraft into a violent turn that stressed the damaged airframe beyond its design limits, the helicopter's structure groaning under forces that threatened to tear it apart. The missile streaked past their tail boom, missing by mere feet before exploding harmlessly against the valley wall. But the evasive maneuver cost them precious altitude and airspeed, bringing them back within range of enemy small arms fire. Bullets sparked off the helicopter's armor as Sarah fought to regain the energy necessary for escape from the valley's confines. Thompson pressed himself against the cargo compartment floor as tracer rounds streaked through the space where his head had been seconds earlier. The communications specialist's equipment sparked and died as enemy fire found its mark, severing his connection to the outside world. "We're taking hits everywhere," Rodriguez called out, his voice strained as he assessed the damage accumulating throughout their aircraft. "I don't know how much more this bird can take." Sarah could feel her helicopter dying around her as critical systems failed one by one. The hydraulic pressure had dropped to nearly zero, making control inputs increasingly difficult, while electrical failures darkened sections of her instrument panel. But they were climbing, slowly and painfully gaining altitude as Sarah nursed every ounce of performance from her disintegrating machine. The valley walls fell away beneath them as they clawed their way toward the safety of open sky. "Come on, baby," Sarah whispered to her helicopter, her voice carrying the desperate affection of a pilot for the machine that carried her through danger. "Just a little bit more. Get us home." Enemy fire began to fade as they climbed beyond effective range of small arms, though the threat of surface-to-air missiles remained constant. Sarah maintained her climb toward the mountain peaks that would provide cover for their escape route. Rodriguez and Thompson exchanged glances in the cargo compartment, both veterans understanding that they had witnessed something extraordinary. Sarah's refusal to abandon them, combined with her exceptional flying skills, had accomplished what everyone deemed impossible. "Phoenix, I don't know how you did it," Rodriguez said quietly, his voice carrying the profound gratitude of a soldier who had been given a second chance at life. But you just pulled off a miracle. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as the adrenaline of combat began to fade, replaced by the overwhelming relief of survival against impossible odds. She had kept her promise to bring everyone home, though the cost to her career and her aircraft had been enormous. But as they limped toward Kandahar airfield, Sarah knew that some things were worth any price. The lives of Rodriguez and Thompson, the honor of keeping faith with fellow soldiers, and the knowledge that she had lived up to the highest ideals of military service. Behind them, the burning valley grew smaller in the distance, its flames a testament to the courage of those who refused to abandon their comrades in the face of overwhelming danger. The morning sun cast long shadows across Arlington National Cemetery, as Sarah Mitchell walked slowly along the pristine pathways between rows of white marble headstones. Her civilian clothes felt strange after so many years in uniform, but the weight of memory remained as heavy as any military equipment she had ever carried. 7 years had passed since that burning valley in Afghanistan, 7 years since the day that changed everything for the survivors of Bravo Team. The court-martial proceedings had been swift and decisive, ending Sarah's military career with a dishonorable discharge that stripped away her rank, her pension, and her identity as a soldier. But some prices were worth paying. Sarah paused before a simple headstone bearing the name Private First Class Michael Carter, the young soldier whose life she had saved during that desperate rescue mission. Carter had survived his surgery and recovered from his wounds, only to be killed in action 6 months later during another operation in the same region. "Hey, Mike," Sarah said quietly, placing a small American flag beside his headstone. "The guys wanted me to tell you they're doing okay. Rodriguez finally retired last year, and Thompson's teaching communication procedures at Fort Gordon." The irony was not lost on her that Carter, the soldier she had risked everything to save, was the only member of Bravo Team who had not lived to see the war's end. His death had haunted Sarah through the difficult years that followed her discharge, a reminder that heroism and sacrifice did not guarantee happy endings. Rodriguez approached from behind, his gait still slightly uneven from the shrapnel wounds that had never fully healed. The former sergeant wore his dress uniform with the quiet dignity of a career soldier, his chest decorated with ribbons that told the story of 3 decades of faithful service. "Sarah," Rodriguez said simply, his weathered face reflecting the deep respect that had never diminished despite the years that had passed. "Thank you for coming." Thompson joined them moments later, his communication specialist's precision evident in the way he arranged flowers beside Carter's grave. The former soldier had thrived in his teaching position, passing on hard-won knowledge to the next generation of military communicators. "Every year, I tell my students about that day," Thompson said quietly, his pale blue eyes reflecting the weight of memory. "About a pilot who risked everything to bring her people home. They need to understand what real courage looks like." Sarah felt tears threatening as she stood between the 2 men whose lives she had saved at such tremendous cost to herself. The years since her discharge had been difficult, filled with civilian jobs that never quite satisfied, and relationships that could not bridge the gap between her military past and uncertain future. "I've never regretted it," Sarah said finally, her voice carrying the quiet conviction that had sustained her through the darkest moments. "Not the court-martial, not the discharge, not any of it. We brought our people home." Rodriguez placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, his touch conveying the profound gratitude that words could never adequately express. "Sarah, you saved our lives. Whatever the military bureaucrats decided, you're still the finest soldier I've ever known." The 3 survivors stood in comfortable silence as other visitors moved through the cemetery, each carrying their own burden of loss and memory. Sarah understood that her story was just one among thousands, a single thread in the vast tapestry of sacrifice that surrounded them. "Colonel Brennan sends his regards," Thompson mentioned, breaking the contemplative quiet. "He's retiring next month after 35 years of service. He wanted you to know that he's never forgotten what you did." Sarah nodded, remembering the weathered colonel who had ultimately chosen to support her mission despite the career risks. Brennan had faced his own consequences for allowing her unauthorized rescue operation, though his punishment had been far less severe than her own. "Major Santos is a full colonel now," Rodriguez added with a slight smile. "She's commanding a helicopter squadron in Germany." still tells everyone that you were the best pilot she ever trained. The updates on her former colleagues brought both comfort and pain to Sarah's heart. While she had paid the ultimate professional price for her actions, others had continued their careers and found success within the military system she had been forced to leave behind. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had followed orders that day, Sarah admitted, her voice barely audible above the whisper of wind through the cemetery trees. If I had just returned to base and left you guys behind, you wouldn't have been able to live with yourself, Rodriguez replied with absolute certainty, and neither would we. You did what honor demanded, regardless of the consequences. Thompson knelt to adjust the flowers beside Carter's grave, his movements precise and reverent. Mike would have wanted us to remember him this way together. He always said that Bravo team was his family. Sarah felt the familiar ache of survivor's guilt as she contemplated the young soldier's sacrifice. Carter had been barely 22 years old when he died, his life cut short by the same war that had claimed so many others of his generation. He was going to study engineering when he got home, Sarah remembered, her voice thick with emotion. Wanted to build bridges instead of fighting wars. The three veterans stood together as the morning sun climbed higher, casting their shadows across the hallowed ground where so many heroes rested. Sarah understood that this annual pilgrimage served as both remembrance and healing, a way to honor the fallen, while affirming the bonds that had been forged in fire. We should go, Rodriguez said finally, his voice gentle but firm. The ceremony starts in an hour. Sarah nodded, taking one last look at Carter's grave before following her former teammates toward the cemetery entrance. Today marked the 7th anniversary of their rescue, an event that had been largely forgotten by the military establishment, but remained sacred to those who had lived through it. As they walked away from the rows of white marble, Sarah felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for years. The price of her choices had been enormous, but the knowledge that Rodriguez and Thompson lived to see their families again made every sacrifice worthwhile. Behind them, Private First Class Michael Carter rested in honored ground, his memory preserved by those who had fought beside him in a burning valley half a world away. His sacrifice, like that of so many others, would not be forgotten by those who understood the true cost of freedom. The morning breeze carried the distant sound of a helicopter overhead, its rotors beating a familiar rhythm that stirred memories of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds between soldiers who refused to leave anyone behind. As we close this extraordinary tale of courage and sacrifice, we are reminded that true heroism is not measured by medals or recognition, but by the willingness to do what is right when everything is on the line. Captain Sarah Mitchell's story teaches us that honor cannot be stripped away by bureaucracy, that integrity transcends rank and regulation, and that some principles are worth any price. In that burning valley 7 years ago, Sarah faced an impossible choice between following orders and following her conscience. She chose to risk everything, her career, her freedom, even her life, rather than abandon her fellow soldiers to certain death. Her decision reminds us that the greatest acts of courage often come at the greatest personal cost. Rodriguez, Thompson, and Carter were more than just soldiers in need of rescue. They represented the sacred trust that binds those who serve together. Sarah understood that leaving them behind would have violated the very oath that made her a soldier, the promise that no one fights alone and no one is left behind. The aftermath of her heroic actions serves as a sobering reminder that doing the right thing does not guarantee a happy ending. Sarah's court-martial and discharge demonstrate that institutions sometimes punish those who embody their highest ideals. Yet her story also shows us that true honor cannot be taken away by any authority. It lives in the hearts of those who choose courage over comfort, duty over safety. 7 years later, as Sarah stands beside Carter's grave with Rodriguez and Thompson, we see the enduring power of sacrifice and brotherhood. Though the young private did not live to see the war's end, his memory is preserved by those who fought beside him. His death reminds us that freedom is never free, and that every generation must be willing to pay its price. This story challenges us to examine our own lives and ask difficult questions. What principles would we die for? What sacrifices would we make for others? When faced with an impossible choice between personal safety and moral duty, which path would we choose? Sarah Mitchell's legacy lives not in military records or official recognition, but in the lives she saved and the example she set. Her story proves that one person's courage can make a difference, that individual actions matter, and that heroism is a choice available to anyone willing to pay its price. As you reflect on this tale of sacrifice and redemption, I invite you to share your thoughts about what true courage means to you. Have you ever faced a moment when doing the right thing required tremendous personal sacrifice? What lessons from Sarah's story resonate most deeply with your own experiences? Please take a moment to comment below and let me know where you're watching from around the world. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this powerful story of military heroism and the bonds that unite those who serve. And here's a question for reflection. What do you think is the most important quality a leader should possess when facing impossible decisions? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might inspire others who are facing their own difficult choices. If this story moved you, you'll find more incredible tales of courage, sacrifice, and triumph in the suggested videos that appear on your screen. Each one explores the extraordinary lengths that ordinary people will go to protect those they love and serve the causes they believe in. Remember to write honor in the comments if you made it to the end of this powerful story. It helps me know who stayed for the complete journey and supports the channel's mission to share these important tales of heroism and sacrifice. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey through one of the most powerful stories of military courage and personal sacrifice. Until next time, may we all find the strength to choose honor over comfort and courage over fear.